In this sequence of tutorials, I'll review creating interactive components with variants in Figma. We can use interactive components to design and prototype more complex user interactions, such as drop-down menus, slideshows or carousels, or simulating panning and zooming effects, for example. I'll demonstrate how to add such functionality to this sample e-commerce mobile website application that I call Kronos for this fictional company I've invented for selling watches. And the static version of that design is here. I'm done with that, but let's make this dynamic and animated and interactive using interactive components and variants in Figma. So Figma makes this easy. Similar to component states in Adobe XD, variants allow you to add multiple states to the same component and then transition between those states. Let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and use this arrow, sort of next arrow button, and I wanted that to be an interactive component. So I'm going to bring it over to my canvas here and not necessarily have it housed within the sort of frame or artwork. I'll bring it back in there once it's an interactive component, but I like to design just on the canvas here for these. And so once I've got that object, I can turn that into a component by clicking on the Create Component button. There's also, of course, the quick key, Control-Alt-K or Command-Option-K on Mac, or you could right-click to make this into a component. You could also go to the main menu and choose the object and create component. So there's multiple ways to do this. I find the easiest way simply to click on the Create Component button. Once it's a component, you'll see that it will turn purple here, and we have this option to include variants of that component. That's what I want to do here. I want to have a sort of normal state to it and a state that where it's going to change color or fill color when you're pressing on it. So I want it to fill with this sort of gold color when I'm pressing on that actual button to give it an active state. So I'm going to add a variant to represent that by clicking on the plus new variant option inside of the design panel here. And then I can name that variant. I'm going to call it the active variant state. I've now got two different states to this, both the default state and the active state. I could select those states from the layers panel here, or I could go and select them right on my canvas. So if I wanted to not have this called default, you could rename that as well. And maybe I want this to be called the normal state or the up state of that particular button. Then I want to switch to the active state that's here and change its style. I'm going to click on that to get into the actual artwork of it where I don't have a fill yet. So I'm going to apply a fill to this. I didn't want the gray fill. I'm going to use a fill from my styles. So I'm going to click on styles here where I already have the gold color in my styles. I'll apply that there. And I now have a interactive component with two different variants, the sort of normal state of that and this active state. So now if I wanted to use that, I could place this from my assets into my design. Since it's in a component, it's now available as an asset, and I can use it in all of my different frames and artboards throughout the design. So I'm going to go ahead and reuse that asset by dragging it into my artboard here and placing it in the right spot. I wanted it 40 pixels from the edge, so I'm just going to hit Shift and arrow over 4 times to get that 40 pixels from the edge. There's my component. If I wanted it to not start in the normal or default state, I could actually just switch what state that component's in, and I might just use this to have variations within my own design. I don't necessarily need to make them interactive to use components. I could just have variations of buttons, for example, that I might want to represent different call to action buttons or something like that, and have different states to those. So it's really handy that we can switch between different component states. I only have 2 in this particular case, but we can actually have multiple different variants assigned to our component so that we could easily have one object that we could change, sort of create variations of depending on our design needs. The other thing that we can do with this is make it interactive. And so to make it interactive, I'm going to actually select the component itself. I wanted to have an interaction right within the component. And so I'm going to go to my prototyping panel here, click on the arrow that I wanted to make interactive, and the idea here is that when I press on this, I want it to switch to the active state. So to do that, I'm going to click on the plus and simply drag it down to the active state. You'll see that the default options here are changing to the active state when I tap that. I actually don't want it on tap. I want it while pressing as the interaction. And I can then also animate to this particular state if I wanted to by having it fade in, like sort of dissolve animation, or smart animate if I was changing it in some capacity. I actually want this particular one to happen instantaneously, to have that instant feedback for the user that they're pressing that particular button. So while pressing, I'll change to the active state. Because I'm using this component inside my design now, if I was to preview this, I'm going to go ahead and just take a look at the preview of that. I should be able to see that interaction happen, and we've enabled an interactive component within Figma. Let's make this more complex and sort of take a deeper dive into using interactive components to create things like slideshows and drop menus, and I'll do that in the upcoming video tutorial.